Do you have to do this or? I thought we're out of it now. No, that's it. No.
So when we speak, we can do.
When you speak,
Good evening, councillors and staff, and welcome to those in our virtual gallery. Hopefully we're getting closer and closer to having a real gallery, but we very much appreciate you joining us in whatever media that you are. Now, could I ask you, councillors, please, and staff, to be upstanding for the acknowledgement of country and the council prayer. I would like to acknowledge that we are meeting on the country of the Dja Wurrung. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the area and their forebears. We acknowledge their living culture and their unique role in the life of our region. Almighty God, we ask you to be present in this council. Direct and guide our deliberations. We ask you to grant us wisdom and sensitivity as we deal with the business of our Shire. May each decision that we make advance the well-being of all our residents. This we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you, councillors. We have the agenda before us for our February ordinary meeting. And welcome to everyone. I think we're a full house. We have no apologies or leave of absence. Item 4, disclosures of conflicts of interest, councillors.
Mr. Mayor, I have a conflict in 8.10. It's about the contract management of recreation facilities.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Murphy. We will note that. Any other conflicts of interest, councillors? If not, let's proceed with item 5, the confirmation of the minutes of our previous council meeting held on the 27th of January 2021. They have been circulated and the recommendation is we move to confirmation of the minutes. Is there a motion so to confirm? Councillor Murphy, Councillor Lavella. Anyone talking against, councillors? If not, the minutes are confirmed. Reports from committees, nil. I keep thinking we must be starting to generate some soon as we get into the year. Petitions, nil. So we move straight away to item 8, officers' reports. Item 8.1, the community engagement policy, which we know that this has taken a lot of time. We also thank those in the public who, in our community, who spent a lot of time with us providing very valuable feedback, and our manager community engagement has put a lot of work into pulling this together. And we've had several conversations as a council in our strategic briefing session. The policy, the draft policy has been circulated, and the officer's recommendation is that council adopt the updated Central Goldfields Shire Community Engagement Policy. Is any councillor prepared to move that recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Vella, and a seconder. Thank you, Councillor De Villiers. Councillor Vella, talking to the motion, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The purpose of a community engagement policy is our community is diverse and engaged, abundant with experience and expertise. By involving the community in planning and decision making, we can promote greater trust, build stronger relationships, and deliver better outcomes. The purpose of this policy is to guide the organisation in meeting the engagement obligations as outlined in Section 55 and Section 56 of the Victorian Local Government Act 2020. Therefore, establishes a clear standard of engagement having regard to the significance, complexity and anticipated level of impact associated with major projects, policies, strategies, service planning, local laws and capital works. To do with deliberate engagement, What is deliberative engagement? This refers to engagement processes that enable community representatives to reach conclusions based on in-depth consideration of relevant facts from multiple points of view, conversations with others, and critical thinking about alternative perspectives, opinions, understandings and trade-offs. Council will undertake deliberative engagement in the following circumstances. 1, where it has a legislated obligation, including community vision, council plan, financial plan and asset plan or other, which is outlined in the document. This policy contains 7 council commitments and 7 objectives. The level of community involvement influence is twofold. 1, it's to inform, and that means it will provide the public with balanced and objective information to assist them in understanding the problem, alternatives, opportunities, and/or solutions. 2, to consult, to obtain public feedback on analysis, alternatives, and/or decisions. I recommend everybody, including the gallery, to view a copy of this document, which can be found online at Council's website after this evening. Have no hesitation in approving this recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Bell. That would be a hard act to follow. Councillor De Villiers.
What? Yeah.
Do you want to, yes? Did you want to talk to it and second it at all?
No.
Don't have to.
That was very informative and I think clear as to what the community engagement policy is about. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor De Villiers. Any other councillors? Councillor Murphy.
I think the main thing that I get out of this is the multiple points of views. So it's important that the community get their points of views across, and they're multiple, not just a group, like a certain group, one certain group who does it all the time. We need to have multiple points of views. We need to get different points of views. So it becomes really engaged, as the word is. So if we don't get the multiple views, we don't get engagement. We don't get what the community really are looking for. So we need the multiple points of view. So we need the community, and if you're watching out there on Facebook or wherever you are, that you need to put your hand up, stand up, and give us your views. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Any other councillors? Look, I just want to say, look, congratulate everyone that's been involved in this. Our officers, our community engagement manager who worked so hard on this, and the whole media team, I should add. Also want to thank all the ward councillors who joined. I know as many of us joined in where we could on many of the occasions, on street sides, in cafes and all sorts of places, in parks, meeting with residents. It was, and thank you to the residents, because we, as Councillor Murphy said, we need to hear what you said, and that was faithfully recorded. And so in a very real sense, this was a team effort between councillors, between staff, between residents, and we've got a policy that reflects that. Okay, if not, any councillors talking against this at all? If not, I'll put the motion. Those in favour, those against, and we adopt the updated community, Central Goldfields Community Engagement Policy. Item 8.2, grant allocations and opportunities. I thought, councillors, it might be an idea just to ask the CEO to outline this a bit. We deal with a number of grants and some big figures, but I think for those, particularly in the gallery, sometimes it's a bit confusing to know what our grants are and what they are. So perhaps just asking the CEO if she'd be kind enough to introduce this item 8.2, grant allocations and opportunities.
Thank you, Mayor. Last year in May, Council was allocated money from the Federal Government Local Roads and Community Infrastructure Program. It's called the LRCI program, and received $789,000, which put towards community projects that have been identified in the community plans. There were 8 community plans that were developed across the Shire, and that funding will help implement some of the key priorities in those plans. Then again, another round of funding was announced by the federal in the federal budget for a further $872,000. And as council will recall, at the last council meeting, nearly half of that funding was allocated to roads, and it was resolved that a further report, which is here tonight, would allocate the balance of that fund. And so it's recommended in the report that the funding balance firstly be allocated to developing a pathway network, so $300,000 toward that project. That's a project that was identified in the priority projects plan, and also in the recent integrated transport plan as well. It's been really important that we link up footpaths and bike paths and shared pathways, particularly under the active living census undertaken in 2019. It was identified that we have 69% of adults living in the Shire were overweight, and only 51% of adults meet the guidelines for physical activity. So anything we can do to link up footpaths and pathways so that people can get active in their transport is really important for the Shire. So it's recommended that $300,000 be allocated to improving the pathway network in Maryborough. And then the balance of that fund, that will be $120,388. That $40,000 be allocated to the 3 wards, Flynn, Tullaroop and Paddy's Ranges, to continue that program of allocating funds to the community plans and important infrastructure projects in the smaller towns around the Shire. So work will happen with the ward councillors and with their communities to identify the projects from those priority plans to implement using those funds. The report also looks at a new fund round that's been opened for the federal government's Building Better Regions Fund. And there's, again, some specific guidelines of what council can and can't apply for with that funding. So the previous funding was given as a right. This funding would be by application. And it's recommended that the project that we have currently underway to operate the Central Goldfields Art Gallery best meets the requirements of that grant fund. It already has $500,000 of state government funding and $273,000 of funding from council in this year's budget to complete stage 1 of that project. And it's recommended that an application matching that funding of $773,000 be made so that you can progress to stage 2 of the project and get more of that project completed for the art gallery. So the recommendation, councillors, is that council allocate the $452,288 balance of the local roads and community infrastructure program round 2 funding to improving the pathway network in Maryborough, $300,000, and $40,000 to each of the 3 wards, Flynn, Tullaroop and Paddy's Ranges, to implement priority projects in our community 2030 community plans, and make an application to the Building Better Regions Fund for $773,000 to progress stage 2 of the Central Goldfields Art Gallery project.
Thank you very much, Ms. Robbie. And I don't think Flynn got a mention there, but I'm sure Councillor Elizabeth Long will be assured that Flynn is definitely mentioned there. won't be forgotten about there. Any questions? Thank you for that, Ms. Robbie. Any questions?
I just have one question. I would just like to know to what extent will constituents in the different wards be allowed to have discussion with the distribution of the $40,000 awarded to each ward?
Thank you, Councillor. So it's proposed that firstly there are the community plans that were adopted by Council, and there are a number of projects in there that are under the infrastructure heading in the community plans. They give you a good starting point for that conversation, but it really is up to the ward councillor to talk to people in the community to look at those priorities, see if they are still priorities, and to work with the community to identify how that funding will be spent.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Robbie, and I'm sure the rural ward councillors, we've already been fairly active, and I don't know whether I'm on Ms. Stockfell's Christmas card list for being such a pest on that. Any more questions, councillors?
I think Jared had
his hand up. Question, or did you just...
No more questions.
No more questions. All right, now we have a specific recommendation that Ms. Roffey's gone through, so I won't read it through again, but in relation to the balance of the local roads and the community infrastructure program round 2 and the Building Better Regions Fund, the recommendations are before you. Ms. Roffey's given an explanation of that. Is any councillor prepared to move the officer's recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Sproul, as seconder. Councillor Vella. Councillor Sproul, talking to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, so this is a really good opportunity for the Shire. Every year, council commits funding for footpaths, and unfortunately, the footpaths are the ones that don't usually get a lot of leeway with funding. So, you know, we're speaking with members of the Shire's footpath network is one subject that continually comes up. So it's really great to have this fantastic opportunity to improve the footpath network within the Shire, which is one of the projects identified in the council's priorities. It's also great to be able to split that remaining 120,000 between the 3 wards, Flynn, Tullaroop and Paddy's Ranges, and yeah, implement some of those priority projects within their community plans.
Thank you very much, Councillor Sprout. Councillor Vella.
The many complaints I have received are in regards to no footpaths, and that is just outside the CBD, and that's not having any footpaths at all. I am aware we have a limited budget. However, maybe we could consider one side of the street paved as a footpath. We could also consider a rollout footpath plan for ongoing budgets each year. As Lucy pointed out, obesity is a huge problem and mostly due to lack of exercise. So I think that would assist people in feeling safe in having something solid underfoot in all areas of Maryborough.
Thank you, Councillor Vella. Any other councillors? Councillor speaking against the motion? If not, I'll put the recommendation as presented in relation to those 2 grant programs. All those in favour? Those against, the motion is carried. Item 8.3, advocacy for weekend rail services, something very passionate to my heart. There is a report presented and the officer's recommendation that council advocate for increased passenger rail between Melbourne and Ballarat, Maryborough, particularly for services that increase opportunities for travel for employment, education and increased weekend services to support regional tourism. Any councillor prepared to move that? Thank you, Councillor Long. A seconder. Councillor Lovett. Thank you, councillors. Councillor Long, talking to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm acutely aware of the impact that COVID has had on tourism in Central Goldfield Shire. And as the Flynn Ward Councillor, I'm also deeply concerned for my ward, especially the small township of Denali. If weekend passenger rail returns to Maryborough, and hopefully the service will be able to continue to Denali, it would open up a huge tourism opportunity for both day trippers and overnight stays. This will in turn increase employment opportunities and boost the local economy. Looking at the legislation and policy context in the agenda, it certainly hits objective 2.3, which states promote Central Goldfields as a place of choice to live, work and play. I look forward to council advocacy to seek train travel to support tourism between Melbourne and Maryborough, with trains to run at reasonable times and to service tourism along the line, including the Talbot Farmers Market. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you very much, Councillor Long. Councillor Lovett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Since the welcome return of passenger rail in 2010, a number of representations to government for increased services were made. Council were very grateful when the government introduced a second service some years ago. Now is the time to push for extra weekend services, because currently the timetabling does nothing to help travel or employment or education purposes, or to increase visitations and tourism. And to demonstrate that, I actually went up and got a train timetable today. If people were planning from Melbourne to come to Maryborough for the weekend and they plan to come by train, it's actually quite difficult. Friday night, the train leaves Melbourne at 4:30 and arrives here at 7 p.m, which is quite okay. Saturday morning, there's a train that leaves at 9 in the morning and arrives here at midday, but the second train doesn't leave till 6 p.m. and doesn't arrive here till just before 11 p.m. And on Sunday, exactly the same. Now, for people who want to come and stay overnight, Friday night or Friday and Saturday night, it's even more difficult. The return train to Melbourne on Saturday morning leaves at 7 a.m. and the return train on Sunday morning leaves at 8 a.m. So I think that demonstrates if we're serious about increasing visitations to this area, additional timetables for trains must be made. As simple as that.
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. Other councillors? Anyone talking against the motion at all? The only thing I'd add to both councillors, it is now, or last year actually, was 10 years, as Councillor Lovett said, since the return of passenger rail to Maryborough, something elected council fought very hard for over many years. As Councillor Lovett said, we've been active in the campaign since then. 10 years we couldn't celebrate that because that was in the height of COVID lockdown. But I think in the advocacy to government, we might remind them that it is 10 years, really 10 years beginning last year, because 2020 was a write-off, but 10 years, and probably time perhaps to mark that with a bit of a celebration and high time, and perhaps even high time for improvement of the services. The reality is what we have is work in progress, and we can't. People measure us and say, look, you're not using the services enough. How can a lot of people use them if they're so infrequent? We just need more. We need critical mass. We don't have that. We need it to make it viable, and weekend services need to be a start. There was an election commitment about Denali. Denali needs to be in the equation. As Councillor Long has said, we need to get busy on advocacy and remind the government 10 years, it's time to move to the next stage, and that is increased rail services. Thank you, Council. I'll put the vote. All those in favour, those against, the motion is carried. Item 8.4, advocacy on the state redistribution that's taking place. State boundaries are being reviewed by the Victorian Electoral Commission, and initial submissions are due early next month. So we've had a report on this, and the officer's recommendation is that we make a submission to the Electoral Boundaries Commission, the VEC, that's the Victorian one, on the state redistribution, support of Ripon being retained, and the key issue of Central Goldfields staying intact within Ripon, but the key issue of communities of interest, because as a primary consideration that we have. Any questions of the CEO in relation to that? If not, is any councillor prepared to move that motion? Thank you, Councillor Murphy, as seconder. Thank you, Councillor Long. Councillor Murphy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the purpose of the report is for the council to consider a submission about electoral boundaries on the current state redivision process. So this is all about to ensure the number of electors, which each district and region remains approximately the same over time. The Electoral Boundaries Commission Act 1982 requires the state electoral boundaries are adjusted. This is called redivision. It takes place after every second Victorian state general election. So that's what we're into right now. So the essential character of Ripon is that it covers the old gold country of central Western Victoria, and any changes to boundaries should not destroy this character. This position is relevant to the communities of interest for Ripon and the Central Goldfields Shire. All of the Central Goldfields Shire is currently in Ripon, and it is recommended that a submission to the EBC includes both retaining ribbon and keeping the whole of the Central Goldfields Shire in ribbon. This will retain Central Goldfields Shire of community interest geographically, agriculturally and historically. It has to be noted that we're in this area of the gold area and the old towns area, and there's the people, the number of people in the ribbon will deal with what we have been for the last few elections. I don't know how many, but it can't be not say we can't go in with a Bendigo or a Ballarat. We are diverse ourselves, and we need to be ourselves. And being ourselves is having the Central Goldfields Shire, the Ararat Rural City, and other towns who are like-minded, like us, represented in the state government. Not just represented as another add-on to a large regional city where we probably wouldn't have a say. So I'm happy to move this motion because I firmly believe we should stay in the ribbon area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Long.
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Long. Any other councillors? Anyone talking against? If not, I'll put the motion that we make that submission to the VEC, the Victorian Electoral Boundaries Commission, favouring retention within REPON to maintain the key issue of our communities of interest. All those in favour, those against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. Item 8.5, draft councillor code of conduct. This is something that, of course, we together with all councillors have been very busy with, as we're required to do and have in place within the first 4 months under the requirements of the Local Government Act 2020. So it actually has to be dealt with at this meeting, although we have, of course, the opportunity, as all councils do, to revise this as we deem appropriate or necessary. And the recommendation is that council adopt the councillor code of conduct. We did discuss, councillors, that and thought perhaps it more prudent that in recommendation to the council will, as needed, nominate a councillor to facilitate discussions between parties and disputes between councillors which involve the mayor. Hopefully that doesn't need to happen, but should it happen, obviously, rather than nominate one person in case the mayor is in dispute or the councillor is in dispute with the mayor, that's not appropriate. Nominate the councillor as the occasion demands, if that ever happens. So the recommendations are there, primarily, of course, that we adopt the councillor code of conduct, draft code of conduct, and that will become then our code of conduct if so adopted. We have that officer's recommendation. Councillor prepared to move the motion. Councillor de Villiers, thank you. A seconder. Councillor Lavella, thank you very much. Councillor de Villiers talking to the motion.
Thank you, Mayor. The purpose of the Code of Conduct is that it acts as a statement of how councillors will behave and work in the course of performing their duties and functions as councillors. This is probably one of the most significant policies for us as councillors that we have developed and will for the past next 4 years. And a lot of thinking and conversation went into drafting this document. The Councillor Code of Conduct is a living document, and we as councillors will be able to make changes and additions as we go along conducting our business. And as the Mayor quite correctly stated, we will approve number 1 of the recommendations, but the second recommendation, the wording needs to be changed.
Thank you very much, Councillor de Villiers. Councillor Lavella.
Nothing further.
Any other councillors? Councillors talking against this at all? If not, I'll put the motion that we adopt the council. Sorry, Councillor.
Want to talk to the motion?
Yes, certainly, please.
Can I have a question to Councillor de Villiers? Can I ask a question to Councillor de Villiers? I just didn't understand what you meant by the second part been changed, or the
The-
words there?
The wording that I have difficulty with is nominate a councillor to facilitate discussions between parties in disputes between councillors which involve the mayor.
So,
We cannot nominate somebody now. We will have to nominate somebody when the event occurs.
I think if I can add to this, Councillor Murphy, to explain, the recommendation, when we looked at it, the problem with nominating a councillor now, it may be that that councillor is the one that's actually in dispute with the mayor. So having one particular councillor nominated wouldn't make sense. So I think the view from our briefing session is that it's more appropriate for council, on the occasion, if there is a dispute between parties which involve the mayor, that council will then nominate a particular councillor that council deems appropriate for that particular dispute with the mayor.
so through the mayor, I'm just making sure that Councillor De Villiers is recommending this motion as a whole, the whole of the report.
Yeah, well, that's my view. Because part one is that we actually adopt the code of conduct. Part two is really just a procedural issue that where part of the code deals with council disputes and the role of the mayor. But of course, what about where the mayor's involved? The councillor has a dispute with the mayor, and the need for someone else to step in with the mediation because the mayor can't, because the mayor's part of it. So in that case, the proposal is, as recommended, that council would, on that occasion, nominate a particular councillor to be involved in that mediation.
Mr Mayor, my understanding is that in the recommendation, number one stays exactly the same.
Yeah.
Number two will simply read, council will nominate
Yeah.
council. So
Yes.
the addition of the words
Will
council
nominate.
will.
Yeah, so I'll accept it with the condition that the wording be changed.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that clarification. Councillor Vella? We're done. Any other councillors? That's right. I think we're all done. So I'll put the motion. All those in favour, those against, the motion is carried. And just reminder, councillors, don't leave until you've signed sign on the dotted line. We have to sign our actual code of conduct before we go to give it effect. Thank you, councillors. Item 8.6, the council plan action plan progress report. This has been the subject of some considerable discussion within our briefing sessions. That is a periodic briefing of all our projects and the status. And the officer's recommendation is that council note the update on the status of the projects delivered in the 2020-2021 action plan. Any questions of the officers at all on that? I think we've spent a fair bit of time on that. If not, is any councillor prepared to move the officer's recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Murphy. And a seconder? Councillor Vella. Thank you very much. Councillor Murphy.
This is an update to the action plan. So it's an update. It's not the final. So just so the gallery understands, if they haven't got this in front of them, that the Local Government Act 2020, council must prepare a council plan which includes the strategic direction, objectives for achieving the strategic direction, strategies for achieving the objectives for at least the next 4 financial years, strategies for indicators for monitoring the achievement of the objectives. So a description of the council's initiatives and priorities for services, infrastructure and amenities. So that's basically what it's about, and this will, when it's finally approved for the next 4 years, it'll govern us for 4 years, will flow us through, and that's what we'll go back to, and that's where we work from. So I'm quite happy to move this.
Thank you very much, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Vella.
Councillor Murphy, you said it perfectly.
How does one add to that? Gosh. Any other councillors? Councillors talking against? If not, I'll put the motion that we note the update of the status of the projects identified in the 2020-2021 action plan. All those in favour, those against, the motion is carried. 8.7, the use and development for a solar energy facility and utility installation at 2748 Pyrenees Highway, Malort. And the details are there. We've spent some time on that. A lot of the attachments are there. The recommendation that Council note that a submission has made to the Minister for Planning, who's the authority in this case, in relation to the solar energy facility and utility installation at 2748 Pyrenees Highway, Malort. Any councillor prepared to move the officer's recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Sproul. And seconder, Councillor Long. Thank you very much. Councillor Sproul talking to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This one was an interesting one. I'm a big fan of renewable energy, and any move kind of towards that, I think is a great idea. But this one did come with mixed emotions. The land that this one's been put on in the report has been stated as using above average farmland, which I think is not ideal. Unfortunately, the council was not included in the site selection process. The solar farm planning comes under the control of the state parliament, and the proposed location is not protected under the Central Goldfields planning scheme. So, as you mentioned, Mr. Mayor, council have submitted a letter of consent with conditions which include a dilapidation report on the roads, stipulations on loading and unloading of vehicles, vehicle access, drainage, amenities, and noise. I actually, when reading the report, I wrote down a list of questions which were asked, and luckily got quite a few responses to, which was great. I had concerns over the hours of operation during the construction phase. The construction would be approximately 4 months, with the hours being 7 a.m. to 7 p.m, 7 days a week. I thought this was a significant period. It has been noted, though, that no more than 2 trucks each day at its peak between week 4 and week 11, and the construction site is also subject to EPA noise restrictions. I weighed up the pros and cons and decided that the move toward renewable energy is more beneficial than the small loss of above average farmland. I do hope, though, that any future solar farm utilise ground that is below average use.
Thank you, Councillor Sproul, and thank you for your work in leading council through some of these processes. You put a lot of work into this, personally, so I certainly want to acknowledge that. And this has been a difficult issue for you because it involves a number of things, but thank you for that work. Councillor Long.
Nothing further to add, Mr. Mayor. I think Councillor Sproul has summed it up quite well. Thank you.
Thank you. Any officers talking against this at all? Councillor Murphy.
I'm talking against this not because of the solar farm or wind farms. I think they're great. What I don't like is Spring Street, state government, coming down and saying, we'll take over solar farms, we'll tell you what's going to happen, and council can just put a little bit in, but maybe we're not going to take any notice. Just like wind farms, just like broader farms under 500,000 chooks or something like that. They just really have stopped us making decisions for our communities. Now, it doesn't matter which government's in, it just doesn't matter. That's what happens. And so we have to live with this. I like the idea of the solar farm. I wish the energy was coming to Maryborough and surrounds and all our little country towns, but it's not. I'm just annoyed all the time that we cannot, as a council group and as councillors and officers, look at these things and make our decisions because they're taken out of our hands for some reason. And it's both sides of government do that. Whilst I put my up to say no, I don't know which way I'll vote yet, but at the end of the day, in 25 years' time, this solar farm and these panels won't be usable. It has got in the report that the proponent has to remove them, or the farmer, if he wants to keep them, he can keep them, or they do new solar panels. It's 25 years down the track. Now, I won't be around for that, but I hope that people and the siblings and the farmers out that way understand that 25 years time, shelf companies can be bought. These things can happen where nothing will be done. It'll just sit there, and we've seen examples of this in America. I still think it's a good idea, but I'm the devil's advocate, and I'm here to make decisions for our community. And when our community rings me and says, there's all these trucks going down my driveway, building something out there a few weeks ago, and they were concreting something that wasn't, and at the end of the day, they ring us. They actually ring us. Around this table, I've got a problem. I've got issues. My amenities are no good, but we can't do one thing about it. And that's what my gripe is. And I'm here to help the community. And thank you.
Councillor Lovett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It shows that councillors don't compare notes. I'm actually going to talk on exactly the same thing. I will be supporting the motion. However, I am increasingly concerned by the actions of state government. Already the planning laws relating to broiler farms have changed. If a proposal is less than 450,000 birds, the planning minister makes a determination. Previously, councils were the responsible authority. Now we see the minister is the responsible authority for renewable energy facilities above 1 megawatt. The issue is not whether the planning application is good or bad. The issue is that local government is no longer the responsibility, but is relegated to making a submission that will be determined not locally in Central Goldfields Shire, but in Spring Street in Melbourne. Our residents who wish to comment on this issue must now do so to the minister, not speaking directly to their local councillor. I believe this is a worrying trend for local government. Mr. Mayor, I believe you're attending the Rural Councils of Victoria conference very shortly. I believe this issue needs to be raised at that conference, and rural councils in Victoria need to voice their concern at this worrying trend. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. I think there'll be support from a number of other councillors to that view too, because it is a widespread and growing concern. Any other councillors want to talk to the motion at all? Now, this is a slightly different one because we're already noting the submission has already been made. We're not the responsible authority. Two councillors have been expressing their concerns rather than necessarily talking against a motion. Is there anything more? Normally, if they're talking against it, I give you the right of reply as you move the motion. Since we're already noting it, there's no need for that. Is there anything more you want to say, Councillor Sprout, to complete the debate before putting it to the vote?
No, I actually agree wholeheartedly with both Councillor Lovett and Councillor Murphy.
I think there'd be widespread agreement there. All right, well, I'll put the motion that we note that the submission has been made to the Minister for Planning in relation to the solar energy facility and utility installation at 2748 Pyrenees Highway North. All those in favour, those against, the motion is carried. Thank you. Thank you, councillors. Item 8.8, the planning scheme amendment, implementation of Denali and Carrie's book flood studies. Some of us have been following this fairly closely. A lot of work has gone into this, and we have all the details there, the background to that work, and I see several attachments. That work has been completed, and the chair has done, I think, a fantastic job in handling that work, and all the expert people. I certainly learned a lot. The recommendation is now that we adopt the revised Central Goldfields Planning Scheme amendment. I won't read all the details of that out, but then we formally also adopt the Carisbrook Flood and Drainage Management Plan and the Denali Flood Investigation Study Report ourselves, and then we finally request approval of the adopted amendment by the Minister of Planning in accordance with the Planning and Environment Act 1987. Is any officer prepared to move that motion? Thank you, Councillor De Villiers. The seconder, Councillor Long. Thank you. Councillor De Villiers.
Thank you, Mayor. This is an extensive report, and what I found really interesting was the presentation of findings during the current or the recent panel discussion that was held. The flood levy planning for Carisbrook has been in the making and amended a few times over the years. The purpose of this current report is to enable Council to consider the Planning Panel Victoria report and adoption of Planning Scheme Amendment C031C GOL as required by sections 29.1 and 3.1 of the Planning and Environment Act 1987. The Planning Panel report recommends that Council make some changes to the exhibited amendment, adopt the amendment and request the Minister for Planning to approve the amendment. Several studies were undertaken, and these studies recommended alterations to the planning scheme mapping and to update and introduce flood overlays to Carisbrook and Denali. The current amendments were made based on flood studies conducted by MCCMA with Council, as well as on-the-ground situations from the events of 2010 and 2011. The Carisbrook Flood and Drainage Management Plan 2013 and the Denali Flood Management Plan 2014 are proposed to be included as background documents in the current planning scheme. I would also like to add that the amended report presented tonight is posted on the Central Goldfields Shire website, and if you want to find it, it's in the planning area on the website. And you can also find it in the agenda for tonight's meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor De Villiers. Councillor Long.
Nothing further to add, thank you.
Any other councillors? As I said before, I just wanted to acknowledge, I think the chair's name of the panel was Mr. Underwood, Jeff Underwood, is that so? But I thought he did a fantastic job. He was thoughtful. He was very, very considerate. He listened to views. I thought he did a fantastic job, and I just felt that I wanted to acknowledge that and acknowledge his contribution. Obviously, a very experienced, but also brought a great degree of interpersonal skills in terms of handling and listening. So, sorry, Councillor.
I would just like to add, if I may, that and invitations will be sent out and has already started to be sent out. That Council has organised a public meeting information session to be held Monday, the 1st of March, from 3 to 5, and everybody who is interested is welcome to attend.
Okay, thank you. I'll put the motion that we adopt in the three parts there about adoption of the planning scheme amendment, the flood management studies, and requesting the approval of the amendment from the Minister for Planning. All those in favour, those against, the motion is carried. Thank you, councillors. 8.9, the December financial report and mid-year review, something we've been looking at, of course, with quite considerable interest, particularly in the context of 2020 and the year we've had and the impact of COVID. The recommendation is that we receive and note the attached financial report for the period to 31st December 2020 and note the financial forecast, including an operating result of $2.4 million and a capital works program of $10.9 million to 30th of June 2021. Is any councillor prepared to move that officer's recommendation? Councillor Murphy. And the seconder? Councillor Lovett, thank you. Councillor Murphy?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, this is an update on our financial performance for the year to date, and how we are tracking against the adopted budget. And it includes a forecast result for the full financial year, which is good to have a forecast budget for the full, and any business of what is going to be happening by June the 30th is very important. So the next 5 months is important. It's also important to know that council, we are in a strong cash position, which is very good to know. So the impact on the forecast on the income is a reduction in the budget surplus to $2.4 million, the variance of $6 million, mainly due to the timing of capital grant revenue, which will come in. So the surplus is 2.4, variance of 6.6, but it's basically due to capital grant revenue. The balance sheet remains, this is great. The balance sheet remains in a strong financial position with a cash and cash equivalent balance of 11.15 million. And its forecast remains strong at the end of the financial year. Now, in any business, and council business and any business, you want to be strong at the end of the financial year. You want to have reserves, you want to be ready to go for the next financial year and the next one, and have cash reserves, and not be worrying too much about where you're going to get those cash reserves. So I'm pretty happy with that. So, Chris, you noted that the last thing I was going to talk about is that operating result of 2.4 million and a capital works program of 2.9 million to the 30th of June. And if everything is on track, we should be pretty happy. I'd thank the officers involved in this area, the directors in that area, general managers. Mick, thank you very much, and everyone who works in that area, and keeping us on track and so forth. Very happy.
Thank you, Councillor Murphy. Councillor Lovett.
Nothing further to add, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. Other councillors? If not, I'll put that motion that we receive and note the financial report and the forecast as presented there in detail. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Now, 8.10 is Councillor Murphy has the last swig of water before having declared a councillor a conflict of interest. I will note that at 6:52, Councillor Murphy left the chamber having declared a conflict of interest in relation to 8.10. Thank you, councillors. 8.10, a contract for management services for the Maryborough Sports and Leisure Centre, outdoor pools, Denali, Maryborough and Talbot, including also Tullaroop Leisure Centre and the Nolan Street Gym. And the recommendation from the officers is that we note the report on the Manager Community Partnerships regarding the process, the proposed process there, and a timeline there. Councillors.
Mr. Mayor, I'd like to move a motion, please.
Yes, indeed, Councillor.
I move that this item be deferred until council are fully informed of the proposed changes to the contract for management services of the Maryborough Sports and Leisure Centre and swimming pools, and that council has input into drafting the new contract, ensuring that user groups are not disadvantaged.
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. Is there a second to that motion? Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Lovett talking to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would make an informed guess that this contract is possibly the largest entered into by council. Over the weekend, when reading the agenda for tonight, I see that the current contract runs until 30 June 2021. There is an option in that contract for council to take up a further 5 years, but this has not been actioned due to new opportunities being identified in council's recreation and open space strategy. The directors of United Leisure, the current operators, were notified of this decision in August 2020. How is it then that the elected council know of the proposed changes was last Friday? No briefings, no discussions, no warnings, the largest contract we're asked to approve. What we are presented with is not a renewal, it is a completely new contract through the introduction of new responsibilities. My concerns are, why hasn't council been involved and have the various user groups been consulted? I have been personally told that the people involved with Tullaroop Leisure Centre knew of this was last Thursday. I have personally today spoken with Highview College and told that they are aware of imminent changes and they are very apprehensive due to uncertainty. The Nolan Street Gym figures largely in their long-term plans. They would like to have access to the gym Monday to Friday from 9 till 4, but realise this will entail negotiations. But the Nolan Street Gym figures large in their future plans. They also raise concerns about the state of the building. The roof leaks, the parquetry floor requires attention, the kitchen is virtually unusable. Having been involved with the building of that building, I know that we're talking potentially of hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now, I find this all somewhat ironic. The very first item on tonight's agenda, item 8.1, was about community engagement policy. The policy we adopted tonight tells how the community engagement is integrated into council's activity to support decision-making and strengthens relationships and partnerships. And yet, on this very issue, I believe we have been found wanting. With respect to Mr Murphy being both an elected councillor and a director of Unified Leisure, I fully support, beyond question, the employment of a probity advisor to oversee the procurement process. That is beyond doubt. However, I believe to vote on this issue tonight puts the cart before the horse. Just this afternoon, I heard a number of councillors asking important questions about this contract, questions that need to be answered before the contract goes out for tender. Therefore, my contention is council need to be informed of the logic behind the decisions made, how the new contract will benefit the community, and council must be comfortable that all the affected parties who use these facilities have been fully consulted and have had the opportunity to put their case. I do not want to see the people of Carisbrook or anyone involved with Highview College disadvantaged by the proposed changes. We must consult with them before we draw up the new contract. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. Councillor Davidius.
I fully concur. Sorry, I fully concur with Councillor Murphy's.
Councillor Lovett.
Sorry, Councillor Lovett's motion, and as I feel that the community has not been consulted and fully informed, and the process, to my mind, is very hurried, and more time should be spent on it.
Any other councillors?
I must admit, after listening to Councillor Lovett and listening to a few others, and I do have my own questions that I feel are unanswered, I agree with what Councillor Lovett is proposing at this point in time.
Thank you. Other councillors at all? I'll just comment on it. I sort of note from the report that it was intended to be continued consultation, but Councillor Lovett's made the point that, and Councillor, supported by Councillor Davidia, is that the view is council needs to be better informed of that consultation beforehand. Look, there's an old Latin saying, festina lente, make haste slowly. Sometimes I think if we're not all on board sufficiently in our understanding, it's just appropriate just to pause a little bit. Let's all get on board. Let's get the information we need. And that's not a reflection on anyone, and I don't want the officers to see that. I certainly don't see a lot of work's gone on. What I think what we're saying is we just want council to be better informed and understand about the consultation and the consultation that's continued. So I don't think anyone should please take that as a reflection rather than just, hey, we're in a learning phase and we feel that we just need to be better informed on this, and Councillor Lovett's motion has proposed that. Councillor Lovett, just putting the motion, would you just read that through again so that everyone's clear of that? Sorry that you have put your mouth on and off.
I move that this item be deferred until council are fully informed of the proposed changes to the contract for management services of the Maryborough Sports and Leisure Centre and swimming pools, and a council has input into drafting the new contract, ensuring that user groups are not disadvantaged.
Thank you, Councillor.
And Mr. Mayor, I have intentionally not put a timing on it. I simply said be deferred. I understand that we have a timing issue with this. So if this motion is passed, it is up to us to act on this very swiftly.
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. And sorry, Councillor Lovett.
I have a question. What are the implications if it's deferred? I'm through you to the officers.
Mr. Collins.
Mr. Collins, sorry.
Thank you. So the implications would be potentially additional cost because the specifications have to be written based on a set of criteria that were initially presented to councillors at a meeting on the 9th of March for discussion about the process. So following any changes, we need to look at what the range of possibilities might be that we would land with. So there are some potential additional costs in there. Other than that, we can run a kind of parallel process of 2 or 3 different scenarios at the same time and still meet the timeline, because the timeline, if you look at attachment 2, shows the tender going live on, I think, the 24th of March or something like that. So potentially we could bring this back to the next council meeting for further discussion, and we could still meet the timelines, but with some additional cost likely to be incurred.
And I think thank you, Councillor Lovett. Thank you, Mr. Collins. And I think to just clarify Councillor Lovett's point too, he's left the timing open. So should there be a need, and should we be in a position to or to call a special meeting to deal with this, we have the powers to do that. So that's the beauty, as I said, about Councillor Lovett's motion, as he stressed, that's kept that date open. I will, and Councillor Lovett, you'll have a copy of that motion to give to our government's manager. Great, thank you. I'll put that motion.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor, could I have a right of reply as the mover of the motion?
Yes, certainly.
I hear Mr. Collins' answers. I am a little bit confused. I hear you say that in the documents we have, and you're correct, that this was to be actioned on the 4th of March. I would hope there was not an assumption that council would just rubber stamp this decision tonight. Ever since I've been on council, I am not a rubber stamp. I look at each individual and judge it on its merits, and I don't think there should have been an assumption and a contract to be entered into based on a certain outcome for tonight. Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Put the motion.
Thank you, Councillor Lovett. I'll put the motion as read by Councillor Lovett. All those in favour? Those against? The motion is carried. Could we get Councillor Murphy back again? Thank you.
Go and walk about.
He was warned not to do this. He's done it.
Perfect law.
Thank you. We'll note that at 7:05, Councillor Murphy re-entered the chamber. Item 9, use of the common seal. We have nothing to seal. We have no notices of motion. Urgent business, councillors. Item 11.
Yes, I have urgent business, please, Mr. Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Vella.
I have a question without notice. It's in relation to the aerodrome. Because of the complexity of issues associated with the Maryborough Aerodrome, could I request a report from council officers regarding the costs of engaging an independent technical expert advisor to review previous council resolutions on this subject and future financial feasible options for the Maryborough Aerodrome? Given this is such an important decision, and especially going forward, and has polarised so many people, and there's so many polarised views, we need to understand from a technical expert, or I fear we will never get to the bottom of this issue. We have a huge community asset with a wide range of benefits for our shire. I ask that this request supersedes any current officer actions in relation to what we're doing at the moment on this matter. This would need to be a time-limited review and specifically focused. And as Councillor Murphy mentioned, sure, we may have to outlay money, but we're in a strong financial position. And as Councillor Lovett mentioned, all parties must be consulted and this needs to be done properly. And the Mayor, if we are not all on board, you know, we need to really ensure that we do this properly. This has been ongoing from my understanding, and I haven't been here since 2010. I think it's time we got some experts in to have a close look at the whole issue.
Thank you, Councillor Lavella. Before I put that for a seconder to accept as urgent business, I just read out clause 20 of our governance rules. The heading is urgent business. If the agenda for a council meeting makes provision for urgent business, and ours does, business cannot be admitted as urgent business other than by resolution of council, and only then if it, 1, relates to or arises out of a matter which has arisen since the distribution of the agenda, and 2, cannot safely or conveniently be deferred until the next council meeting. So I guess, and I should acknowledge, Councillor Vella, you were kind enough to tell me about this earlier today, and I appreciate that. You know, in terms of no surprises. But I must admit, I put to council before inviting a seconder a concern about whether it meets the requirements that it is related to or has arisen out of a matter which has arisen since the distribution of the agenda last Friday.
The only reason I raised this, as I mentioned to you when I chatted to you in regards to this questions without notice, you did advise me at that point in time, Mr. Mayor, that maybe we could put that in urgent business. Did you not?
To clarify, you asked me at the time, you said you wanted to raise a question without notice. I indicated there are no provisions in our governance rules for that. The only opportunity would be to seek to do so under urgent business, but indeed it has to meet those criteria. That's the
Well,
rule.
I understand that, but I'm quite surprised that we don't have questions without notice. I've never come across that before.
Well,
so where would you put questions without notice?
Well, I think Councillor Bella, that might be something that we can look at more broadly in a review of the governance rules. But we don't have questions without notice. We have urgent business so defined. So my problem is, I didn't write this, but it is fairly standard for all councils' urgent businesses way it's defined. It is something that has arisen since the agenda has been prepared and can't reasonably be held over. And the reason for doing that, if I can just explain for some of the new councils, that the intention is that councils shouldn't ever seek to introduce things perhaps that are seen by the community or residents to be under the radar that haven't been given proper notice on an agenda or through a notice of motion if a councillor is raising it. So urgent business is always heavily prescribed, and many councils in fact also have an added requirement that it must not involve any financial commitment because that can't be reasonably assessed as urgent business. So there's just some difficulties about that. I mean, we are due to consider the airport again under the strategic briefing next month as we're continuing our work. I just pose that issue about if there's a seconder and if the council votes on this, for the council to decide. But prima facie, I can't see. Well, council will have to accept that it has arisen it's a matter that's arisen since the distribution of the agenda on Friday. I have to say to council, I have difficulty with that under the definition, but I'll invite if there's a second to the motion at all.
Can I just speak for one moment? Well, if that's the case, and given that I did it in good faith, well, I raised in good faith under what you suggested on where I may raise it, how do I raise this with the CEO and the officers to have a look at this particular request? Because given the problems that we've had for so long, I think outside experts overseeing the whole airport issue should be the way to go.
Well, I'll perhaps, two things. I'll perhaps invite the CEO to comment too. As a councillor, at any time, you're welcome to talk with the CEO, to meet with the CEO and put any proposals to the CEO, any concerns. But again, we've been dealing with Maryborough Airport fairly constantly over the last 2 months. We're due to consider it, is it next week or the week after we've had a further report, ask the CEO for that, back again, so it'd be an opportunity then to deal with it and explore it. So I don't want you to lose your trust, it's just the timing and the process.
I accept
that. Ask the CEO,
is there a
do you have anything you can add to that about how we might consider that appropriately within our framework?
Yeah, thank you through the Mayor. Look, I certainly through a briefing we can discuss options for a way forward, and at the next council meeting there will be recommendations and it will possibly be included in there. And in normal circumstances, that a notice of motion could also be raised. So there's rules in the governance rules around notice of motion. They normally need to be given with a bit of notice, and they can be included in an agenda with the amount of notice that's in the governance rules. But I certainly, we are still looking at options and talking about the aerodrome through briefings, and a report will come to a council meeting at some point with recommendations, and it's up to council to move a motion in regards to those recommendations when it comes to council meeting.
Thank you. Well, I will consider that. I will withdraw my my questions without notice, but I certainly hope you would consider what I was just discussing. Thank you.
Well, certainly I'll ask perhaps the CEO to include that on. Perhaps Absolutely. You can give the CEO so we can circulate that when we next deal with the strategic briefing paper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
Okay, we note that you've withdrawn that. Thank you, Councillor Bella. Any other business, councillors? We have no confidential business. So with that, then I'll close the meeting at 7:14. And thank you all, and thank the officers for their work with reports. Thank those in the virtual gallery for your participation on Facebook or whatever other media. And look forward to seeing you again at the March Ordinary meeting, if not before. Thank you, councillors.